Hello everybody! Welcome to what is going to be a bit of a different video. I've divided this video into a couple parts. First, I'm going to give you a little background about me as an artist and how I got to the point I'm at now, and also what sparked my interest in markers. And then we're going to look through some of my sketchbooks, and I'm going to show you how I went from knowing pretty much nothing to where I am now, and what I learned along the way, step by step, and how I got to that point, like how do you learn? What experiences teach you something, and how do you apply that to the next painting or the next drawing? So this is not a marker tutorial. This is a very honest journey of an artist who has been struggling like crazy to teach herself a new skill. And if you've ever done that, you know what it feels like. If you're new here, my name is Sarah, and I'm a full-time artist living in Scotland. I specialize in landscape painting. So I usually use watercolor and gouache and oil and acrylic. And over the last few years, I've been getting more and more into markers. Specifically alcohol markers. And so today I want to tell you the story of how I've been teaching myself a new art skill, and that is how to draw with alcohol markers, specifically doing landscapes. And I have a very specific aesthetic, a very specific look that I like doing with my marker drawings. It's what some people might call very chunky and expressive. So I've divided this video into a few different parts, and I'll put chapter markers down in the description, and you can skip ahead if you want. But first I'm going to start with my background, like what first got me interested in markers and how it snowballed into what it is now. And then I will jump into how I've been using the markers, what I've learned along the way, and then I'll do a little demonstration of my current technique. And I will also do some tutorial style marker videos in the future, but I really felt that it's important to do something like this first to just show you guys what the process is like for teaching yourself a new skill. And if you're kind of in the same boat, or you've been struggling to learn a new skill, maybe you can get something out of this video. This is a big stack of artwork that's organized in chronological order, but let's start with let's rewind a little bit. We'll go back to my teens and early 20s. I had graduated from art school. I got a degree in fine arts, a general art degree, and I was, at the time I had been specializing in drawing and ceramics, and a little bit of graphic design, basically just learning how to use like the Adobe suite. So my whole artistic life, my whole life actually in general, I've been focused on drawing. That to me has always been the most natural form of self-expression, perhaps alongside photography, but that's a whole other story. But drawing has been like the core of everything I do as an artist. It's probably the one thing I enjoy the most. And so I graduated from art school and I went straight to design school. I studied interior design with an emphasis in sustainability, and it was amazing. Not only the design program, but I also took a bunch of electives that just helped me grow as an artist and hone my drawing skills. One of my favorite classes was called architectural rendering, and that was the first spark of interest in markers, because we were, at the time I was in design school, it was right on the cusp of when digital was kind of taking over the industry. So digital rendering wasn't quite as huge back then. It is now. Now I think less and less programs are teaching traditional drawing for architectural rendering. But anyway, my class was purely using pencil and colored pencils and inks and markers. So I'll pop a couple photos on the screen from those classes so you guys can kind of see what we practiced. But overall, it was just a really cool experience. However, when I graduated, suddenly everyone was into digital. So I didn't touch markers for years, many, many years, probably 7 or 8 years, and I kind of forgot about them. So after design school, I was in the design industry for quite a while, and eventually my photography business grew on the side, and I was able to quit my job and chase my personal goals, which was amazing. And at the same time, I was also starting to learn how to paint. So that was about 2015 when I quit and I became a full-time artist doing my photography and painting. But along the way, I had always been extremely interested in any form of drawing. So mixed media, just interesting ways of mark making, using untraditional combinations of materials. And markers were always kind of in the back of my mind. So in 2017, I participated in Inktober. So that's a month-long challenge where you do an ink drawing every single day of the month. And for half of the month, I think, I devoted it to markers. I bought a set of gray markers. So we're going to open the first sketchbook here. So this, it goes back to 2017, and I saved my place to Inktober, very minimal, like maybe 3 or 4 shades of gray. And I was also combining that with like a brush pen, an ink brush pen, like this. But before that, it was all just like ink work, line work. And I was slowly starting to get into the markers. So these are my first, my first few marker drawings, just figuring out how the heck you layer them. I think it was a really good approach for me to start with gray markers only. I didn't have a clue how to layer anything, or I was still trying to wrap my mind around the idea of using the negative space of the paper as much as you need to do that for markers. I was kind of familiar with that idea because of watercolor. That's like your main strategy with watercolor, but it felt so different when it came to drawing. And I experimented a lot with trying to make scenes where it felt like light, there was light pouring through. And then I did some more graphic stuff like this. But overall, it was just tons of experimentation. I had purchased some markers from Blick Art when I was in Utah. I actually went to their store, their physical store, so I got to pick out some colors. And these were some of the markers that I bought, mostly based just on landscape colors I thought I would need. Little did I know that it is very useful to have soft, subtle, almost pastel versions of colors in addition to bright, vibrant colors. So when I finally started to practice with them, I realized that my selection made it a lot harder. But at the same time, it was a really interesting experience for me to try to figure out how to work with such a strong but limited palette. But I have to admit that it was excruciating. And after these few drawings, I gave up. I was not happy. I was confused and frustrated, and I was like, screw markers. So pretty much 2 years passed before I bothered touching markers again. And I think it was when we had first moved to our last house, and I was exploring the woods a lot, and I was like thinking, what would be a really small drawing kit that includes color that I could take out with me for like short walks. And I found my markers in my drawer, and I was like, oh, like why wouldn't I just grab a few markers and take them out and just be able to draw with them and have a little fun with color. And so let's take a look. And this was also my first video I ever did about markers. This was my my attempt at drawing a tree in the autumn season. So it was very colorful, lots of vibrant colors, which was good. But again, I felt massive amounts of struggle trying to layer things and understand how how to use such vibrant colors together. So once again, I was extremely frustrated and I gave up again. So then another year passed and someone sent me some chameleon markers, which are these crazy duotone markers. And I did a little test slash review about them. I think I have a video, I'll link it if I do. But it was a good reminder that markers can be really, really good for value studies and or quick studies if you can wrap your mind around it. And I was like, maybe I do want to use markers again. But then I got sidetracked by a ton of other projects and I didn't touch them for several months after that. And then in mid 2021, I found my little set of markers again in my drawer and I was like, okay, I've grown as an artist. I should be able to figure this out by now. So I did these little studies. And even though I hate the color combinations, I still really struggle with those colors, those original colors I chose. I was like, especially with this one, I started to think, okay, maybe there is a way I can approach this that's a little more structured, and I can figure out some repeatable strategies to make the experience more fun. But if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do it right. And I'm not gonna suffer through using these like 8 super intense colors that I don't even really like. And so I purchased my first set of Shinhan markers. These are the Shinhan Touch Twin markers. And I didn't purchase this many at first. This has been the accumulation of like a year's worth of markers. But I did buy a decent amount the first time. And I will post a video, I'll link to a video here so you guys can watch the unboxing and swatching and all of that if you want to. So I got my new markers and I was just like ready to play and experiment. And I had a much more mature and healthy mindset when it came to experimentation. And I knew from the past experiences that if I get too obsessive about the details and if I get too rigid with my process, I'm gonna end up frustrated again. So luckily by this time, by mid 2021, I had such a drastic improvement in my mindset, in my approach to trying new mediums. And that really, really helped. So I just started sketching stuff around my house and in my yard and letting it loose. And in that process, I realized that I really enjoy doing ink line work with markers, but not exclusively. So this is an example of using just a gray marker with some ink. Pretty standard approach to using markers, I would say, but I love this, especially for value studies. Value studies are so valuable when it comes to the painting process. And this is such a fun, quick way of doing it without the need for brushes or palettes or water or anything. So if I'm like outside doing a quick walk, I can just take a pen and even one marker, maybe 2, and do stuff like this. So that was a very enlightening experience for me. And then I started adding colors and I started playing with variations of layering. And so doing this one, I figured out that it's so much easier to start with your highlights, and that's probably like the most obvious thing. But finally, I had a set of colors, a set of markers, which included very, very soft pastel versions of the colors. So I was able to do that for the first time, and that changed everything. So my biggest suggestion, if you're doing this, is to get whatever your favorite colors are. If you end up buying like some bright, beautiful colors, get the lightest of pastel version of those colors as well, because it changes everything. It makes the process so much more fun and enjoyable, at least in my experience. But again, I was combining this with my brush pen, so very bold, dark brush strokes as well. And this is kind of where you can see my expressive mark making aesthetic coming through. So it's something that I do a lot with my painting, but with drawing, it's so much more direct and it feels a little bit more obvious with drawing. So like actual circles, big chunky marks, big zigzags, all of that stuff. I love it. I just can't get enough of it. And so like the floodgates opened and I was like, okay, markers are actually fun and I really want to figure out how to use them. But it took a ton of repetition to even get to where I am now, and I am nowhere close to where I want to be. But between the end of 2021 or mid 2021 and now, which is early 2022, so it's been a few months, I have filled many, many, many sketchbook pages. And so I'll show you a few of those and talk a little bit about my thought process and how doing specific things have helped me progress. So I bought this sketchbook. It's a Pith sketchbook, P-I-T-H. By the way, I love their binding and their whole aesthetic. But I quickly realized as soon as I started using it that it's not ideal for markers. It's not the worst paper, but it's not super ideal. Different papers absorb different amounts of ink and they create different edges and they allow you to blend or not blend. So it's something that I do need to invest more time in. Please don't flood my comments with a million suggestions for papers unless you've tried a paper for months and months and months or years and you have like expert opinion about it. Then maybe I will take your suggestion. But I've had so many people say, oh, I heard this paper is good. Have you tried it? Because I ended up wasting so much money on just like random suggestions. Okay, end rant. It does allow the edges to feather a tiny bit and it doesn't seem to allow me to layer very well. It bleeds a lot as well. So I've had to double up my paper on almost every page that I've used markers of any kind. So yeah, you can see how much that's bleeding, which is fine because it ends up being like a very three-dimensional sketchbook. But it's just something to keep in mind that just like with watercolor, where if you use cheap paper, crappy paper that isn't really meant for watercolor, it will completely ruin your watercolor experience. So with markers, I'm realizing very quickly that the paper actually makes a huge difference. So I stopped using this one for markers and now it's like my mixed media ink drawing sketchbook, which is fine. I wanted a like single sketchbook I could take out and then bring any of my art supplies with me and be fine, be good to go. And so many people suggested these Stillman and Byrne sketchbooks. And this is the Delta and this is the Zeta. So I'll show you both. If you compare the color of this white to the actual color of the paper, you can see that the Delta sketchbook, at least this version, the ivory, is a very warm color, whereas my Zeta is a bright white. And this, I got the Delta cold pressed, whereas my Zeta is the hot pressed. So this one is super smooth and this one is a little bit textured, but mainly I just wanted to try the differences and see if it actually made a difference. So let's take a look. The first thing I did when I got all my new Shinhan colors was start swatching them, and as I continue to get new colors, I make a new swatch sheet or kind of fill in the blanks. And that is like one of the most useful things you can do. Have a swatch sheet with you at all times until you get super familiar with every single color you have. I have to reference this every time I draw. These are markers, but then I realized the cover has a different like finish on it, so it doesn't take the markers as well. And then these first few pages are watercolor and gouache, so we'll skip those. And then I started getting into marker. This is marker with watercolor on top of it. On the left is a marker drawing without ink, and that was a really good reminder that I need to work from light to dark. By the way, this paper does bleed through a little bit if I do tons and tons of marker layers, but it's not nearly as bad as my other sketchbooks. And for the most part, like this does bleed through a little bit, but you can't really see it because I painted on the back of it anyway. So I can kind of get around that. But this is a watercolor background, and then I did ink on marker on top of it. Both of these are that same strategy. This is when I started to try to use limited palettes. Of course, I was seeing what I could do with my brighter colors. This isn't a very subtle color palette at all. And then I started looking at my greens and realizing I still was missing quite a few greens that I wanted. Unfortunately, the place I buy my markers, Jackson's, has been out of stock for like months and months and months. So I'm still waiting on a few new greens that will kind of complete my selection, my green collection. Anyways, this was just more practice with layering, from starting with the lightest colors and then moving slowly and slowly into the darker colors. Also found it really, really helpful to include your swatches. Any color that you use, put a little swatch next to it, maybe even write the name of it. If you have a ton of colors, you might need to do that, but I can easily reference my chart to know what these are. But it just is a super helpful reminder when you look back at it, like, oh yeah, I can achieve that color by mixing those two. And then we get into some more layering tests. And it was around this drawing that I started to think about how I should make color swatches, color mixing charts. Because as I started to layer the different colors, I got an orange versus a salmon, and it was just like this aha moment, like, I don't even know what colors I can make with all of my markers. You can kind of see if I tilt it, but I also started to experiment with layering colored pencils and seeing what that does. And then I decided it would be good to do some more focused studies rather than just randomly grabbing colors and just making whatever crazy thing I want to make. So it was like, rocks are always a good subject for me because it's like a thing I know how to draw, and it helps me practice how light falls on an object, and just like gives me some direction when I'm practicing how to layer these markers. So I started doing marker studies of rocks. By the way, this is watercolor grass, but the rest is marker. And trying to use subtle colors in the distance versus bright, vivid tones in the foreground. And also seeing how this paper handles like streakiness, because that's a thing with markers apparently, if it's streaky or not. And I also realized that depending on how fast you move the marker, it can create a soft fill, versus if you take your time and let it settle and then do the stroke next to it, you'll get more of a streaky tone, a streaky look. So that's something you have to pay attention to. And again, more layering. Quite a lot of layering. And then we start getting into the mixed media side of things again. This is like my happy place. When I can use anything that's on my desk and just grab it, whatever's I feel in the moment, and just make a thing, I love that. So I was seeing how much I could layer with the colored pencils, and whether or not the pencils would like stick or flow over the marker. And it does. There's like absolutely no problem with that. And also how well the lighter colored pencils show up on the darker marker. So lots of these are studies, small color studies for larger paintings I'm doing. So they had a purpose. In addition to just having fun with markers, I started getting more comfortable with them. So I was able to actually utilize them as part of my workflow. And it felt so good to be able to do that without the worry of like, this marker drawing is bad. Like, no, it's actually, this is a tool for me to develop my other bigger paintings. And to be honest, I actually really like these cute little thumbnails, even though they're quite messy. Like, I like that. And same thing, just this one was I was trying to use the lighter tones without going super, super dark, because it's so easy to go super dark with markers. Like, it's tempting to grab those bright, vivid tones, those deep tones, and like add them in. But then when you use soft tones and just keep layering them and layering them, you can get very whimsical results. And I believe that's we're towards the end. Yeah, so it was around this spread that I also started working in this longer sketchbook. So we'll leave this here as visual inspiration. But this was the bright paper again, and originally I started using the sketchbook thinking I would only use my gray markers. Like I would devote the sketchbook to value studies and just have fun with gray markers, and then immediately threw that out the window. I started making notes about which markers I was using, which really, really helps when you're looking back on your studies to know like, oh, that's that color, okay. And especially when you're layering a lot and the color changes. And because the markers bleed through this paper, you're gonna see that on the backs of all of these, there's no marker. So we have the marker on the right side, and anything on the left side was done after the fact. And it's just, I'm going back and like filling in the blank pages so they don't waste it. Okay, so this is when, you know, I had just been doing this, and I was in that very like free flowing mindset of let's just use big chunky brush strokes or marker strokes, marks, let's just say marks, and not care how the edges look. Don't worry about blending, and let me just see if I can like get this look that I want out on the paper. There's a little bit of colored pencil on the top here and there, but it's like 99.9% marker. And I also realized at this point that because I'm very used to painting, my paints, when I put a watercolor sky in, everything flows together, and it's so easy to create beautiful gradients. And the gradient is the thing that allows those bold brush strokes to really stand out. So with watercolor, you use a combination of soft layering with more bold brush strokes like dry brush. And with marker, I know that you can get very soft bleeds and gradients, but I started to veer away from the feeling like I needed to do that. And instead I went straight towards my more bold, expressive mark making aesthetic. And this was the moment I realized that even in the sky, like if I layer lots of these colors together and I make it very streaky, as long as I use a horizontal application compared to short spiky marks down here, it's clearly going to look like the sky. And yes, it is very streaky, intentionally streaky, and it has its own, like, you know, I don't know what style you would call this, but I started to realize how much I love to do that. So that's going to be something you see a lot in this sketchbook. And this one, I was trying to see what kind of textures I could create with the colored pencil on top. So you can see maybe up close, there's a bit of that like colored pencil on top of the marker there. But I was really trying to layer a ton of color on this one. I wanted to see how much it could handle, and there's probably 15 layers of marker on this one, and you can barely see it on the back. So I don't know if that means because I was working quick, I wasn't letting the ink, like if I kept my marker on the page, maybe it would soak the ink in more, or maybe it's because I was using light colors, but that was fascinating to me. This one was an attempt to go back to some of my older, more bold colors, which I still have and I still use here and there, but I don't, I'm still learning to love them. I'm finding that I'm much more drawn to the subtle colors. And look how much those bled through. So I don't know, it must be like certain colors do it more than others. Yeah, so more of the same here. And the reason I want to show you this page by page is because it doesn't just happen instantly. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 drawings. All, you know, it's endless. And this was just a very loose water study, which, yeah. This one I actually did outside. It was the first one where I took my sketchbook outside with me, and oh my gosh, you guys, I took my entire case. I was walking down the trail with this giant thing of markers. Luckily it has a handle, but I was like, what is wrong with me? I could have just brought like 10 markers or even 5, but it was fine. It was a sunny day and it was really beautiful out and I had fun. And I think I've done this scene multiple times actually because I enjoyed it so much. Once again, I find that drawing water is one of the most challenging things because I don't have a lot of blues. So I think I want to invest in a few more blues and just be able to do like soft, subtle changes between the colors. Even though I do like, you know, the bold look of it, it's just, yeah, it's something that I eventually will work towards. This was a very limited palette, maybe like 6 or 7 colors, and just playing with directional marks to indicate different surfaces. So obviously this is the ocean coming in. I made it very horizontal, same with the beach, and then the rocks start becoming more diagonal, more vertical. So that's another good strategy you can try to use. This was a little study I did at the local garden, but I forgot my darks, so it was a very bright pastel painting. And yeah, it's just lessons learned like that. I kind of wish I had taken just like a pen, like even just a little ballpoint pen. I could have had a lot of fun with defining some of these shapes a little bit better, because I think that's where it's lacking. There's not like a lot of definition, but lesson learned. Again, working with directional marks because, you know, I wanted the rocks to stand out in the foreground, but I wanted a soft, subtle shift towards the back distant hills. So most of the landscape, all the marks go like this, and the sky as well. And then as soon as I get to the foreground, obviously the color gets brighter, but I also change directions with the marks. So it's kind of a good, it's something that I'm still playing with, still figuring out. And then we have an attempt to create a soft sky. And as you can see, it's not so soft, but it was a very good lesson learned. I was practicing like even strokes. The tricky part about it was to create highlights up here, which are very subtle in the tree. I was drawing to this edge, so I was not going over the whole thing. So I had to go like here to here to here to here to here to here, and then across the whole thing. And I realized that is really hard to do, which maybe it's easier on certain papers, or I don't know, just my technique needs to improve. And that's it so far. Now that I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours just putting the marker to the paper and not worrying, not stressing about it, the experience has drastically improved, as has my understanding about how to use the materials. The problem, or maybe it's not a problem, but the struggle I have is that I have such a specific aesthetic that I want to create. I can't find a single tutorial online for how to do it. So I'm forced to go through the excruciating hours and the messy pages and like just pick it apart second by second, piece by piece. And that is literally the artist's process, what people have been doing for centuries, right? I think we're so spoiled now being online, having the option to just click a button and everything is given to you. And that has been an interesting experience for me, like realizing that that's where my mind went. Like, I want to improve. Oh, I should go look for a class. Or I should go find a Patreon or like find a tutorial or whatever. Like, it's so anyways, I'm sure I'm gonna have tons of people giving me suggestions for people to look at online, and I appreciate that. But the problem is I have scoured the internet for like the look that I want to create, and I can't find anyone. And you guys don't know what that look is either because I can't explain it or show you yet. But we're getting there. So I'm going to continue to document it, and hopefully at some point I'll be able to represent that vision. And if I do figure that out, when I figure that out, figure out how to do it, I will absolutely share my knowledge. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has a specific vision in their mind and just doesn't know how to do it, because from what I can tell, whenever I share stuff on Instagram or Discord or wherever, people comment and they say, how did you do that? So I know I'm not the only one. And I want to be able to share that knowledge and help others get over the hardship of trying to, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. However, I'm just going to keep repeating this, but it is such a normal thing to go through as an artist. So don't think you're the only one if you're going through the struggles like that. It is the curse of the artist. But the cool thing is that because we are all so plugged in nowadays, it is easier to share knowledge. And from what I've seen personally by sharing my knowledge on YouTube and elsewhere, it's just an amazing way to connect with a community of like-minded people. And so that's why I will continue to do that. Thank you for watching this ridiculously long-winded video. Next time I will share more of a tutorial style video, which I'm sure will interest more people. But if you enjoyed this, let me know. Leave a thumbs up, or maybe let me know your experiences in the comments. And yeah, I'll see you again soon. Take care.